Well, welcome everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started. As our panelists come up to sit at the table, welcome everyone to PACE Liftoff in Houston. My name is Steve Stelzer. I'm the program director of the Green Building Research. This is so we can. Actually, we're recording this and videotaping it, and it will be on the Green Building Resource Center. It'll be on the Green Building Resource Center website. I don't know, within a month or however long it takes HTV to do it. And we've got some there now. It's really kind of nifty. I actually use that as a resource for a lot of people, believe it or not. 2 years ago in 2015, we had the largest event that I ever had on tiny houses on Earth Day, as a matter of fact. And so we had to have it in the lobby downstairs. It was 250 people. So that was pretty nifty, and and there's still a lot of interest in tiny houses, and people want to know, well, how small can they go, and what does it take to get a permit, and all these kind of interesting questions. And so they can either watch the video or just take a look at the slideshows or whatever they want to do, and it's very useful information, and it's going to be good for a few years before the technology totally changes, and we can all be George Jetson, and just kind of throw down the the briefcase and it pops into something. So until that fantasy starts happening, it's good to have these things. At any rate, so yeah, I kind of got off the wagon here. Again, Steve Stelzer, City of Houston. I'm the program director of the Green Building Resource Center downstairs. I am kind of partnering. I'm partnering with the U.S. Green Building Council chapter of Texas, and I'm a member, so I'm kind of always glad to team up with like-minded individuals. So this is kind of a commercial specialty here. There is no PACE for residential at this point in time. So I'm really glad to finally have this. Basically, talking to Tim Crockett a year and a half or two ago, and PACE was going to happen in Texas, and I'm going, wow, I can't wait till one happens in Houston. I'm going to have an event. And so what? You shot the email, and what? We were on the horn talking like 2 days later. So this is what is good for business. It's good for energy efficiency. It's good for the planet. I mean, this is, man, I'm going to start getting teary-eyed here in a minute. It's just so good. So, at any rate, that's kind of it. We have a moderator, Marina, and but I need to go ahead and we actually have an underwriter for this 2018 series. Rockwool and Rockfon, so we're very happy about that. Koppel, do you want to say a couple of words on behalf of the USGBC chapter?
First of all, thank you again, Steve. This is a huge opportunity for USGBC. This partnership actually lets USGBC members get involved with City of Houston and interface on different topics. That's really sort of the breadth that USGBC brings, and especially because we are thinking about buildings and working in buildings. And one of the sponsors today that has sponsored this event is Roxel. So Rockwool and Rockfon are the official sponsors. And John Ram from Roxel, could you please say a few words about Roxel?
So thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I do work for a company called Rockwool. We manufacture a stone wool insulation. So when we talk about stone wool insulation, we are talking about an insulation that is non-combustible, water repellent, and vapor permeable. So one of the things we're going to discuss today is on how we improve the energy efficiency of buildings. So insulation, no matter which type of insulation that is one of the lowest hanging fruits and easiest way to improve the efficiency of the building. So we want to try to tackle the most things or the easiest things first. So addressing the envelope or the enclosure is one of the best ways to improve the efficiency before we begin to look at some of the other options that are out there as well. So it's not going to be the only thing that we look at, but insulation is definitely one of the ways. And by using a non-combustible insulation, you're preserving life safety of the occupants, ensuring they have access to a safe egress of the building, as well as ensuring their life safety. So if you have any more questions about stone wool insulation, I will be at the back with some samples. You can touch and feel the product after the session is done. So thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to turn this over to Marina to introduce her panel. Actually, Marina and I have worked together for a while, and this was one of those really happy sort of collaborations. I said, hey, I want to do this PACE thing, and she kind of goes, well, you know, I happen to be involved with the PACE Texas Authority. You want me to get a few people together? And I went, oh, don't throw me in the briar patch, really. I want to do all the hard work and, you know, beat myself up and call a bunch of wrong numbers and play telephone tag and all that kind of jazz. And so the next thing you know, boom, 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 you know, hey, how about these people? So without any further ado, Marina, take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Steve, and thank you all for coming out, and thank you also to USGBC for partnering with Steve on this event, as well as the City of Houston for being the impetus for getting the PACE program launched here in Houston. So as Steve mentioned, my name is Marina Bedoyan-Criticos. I serve as the program advisor for the Texas PACE Authority.
It's hard to hear back here. Can you speak up just a little bit?
Sure thing. And one thing just to note, the microphone is not for loudness in the room. It is for the recording. So yes, I'll speak up and use our stage voices though. So I'm Marina Bedoyan-Criticos. I'm with the Texas PACE Authority, which is the nonprofit program administrator for the PACE program in the state of Texas. We work on behalf of local governments to administer the program at no cost to each of the local governments in which the PACE program is in the United States. In the state of Texas. And we're lucky here in Houston to have closed several projects now, and thrilled to be here to talk to you about the first office building project, multi-tenant office building project in Texas. We think it's a great project that we're going to be able to share as a best practice moving forward. And I'm going to have to get up and get the keyboard. Sorry, guys. So we've got a great panel with us today. Steve, I've got technical difficulties. All right. There we go. So we've got a great program with us today. At the far end of the table, we have Seth Islami, who is the property manager for Stellar International Commercial Real Estate, which is the property that we'll be talking about today. Next to him, we have Tim Crockett, who's the president of PACE Building Efficiency, who really served as the coordinator to get the program up and pulled together. And then to my right is Rachel Davis, who's the business development officer for Petros PACE Finance, the group that really ensured that there was capital to get this project in place and moving forward. So thrilled to have all three of you here today. Thank you very much for taking the time, and we look forward to a great conversation. And really, we do want this to be a conversation, so as much as I have some prepared comments, questions for the panelists, if any of you have any during the course of this session, please feel free to raise your hand. We'd like to start off first for getting an idea of kind of who's in the room. Do we have any property owners or property managers? Fantastic. Architects or engineers? Okay, what about building consultants or service providers? Super. I'm going to drill down to specific, anyone on the distributed generation side, solar? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that. That gives us an idea of how to kind of point this conversation moving forward. So we're going to start off with a couple of questions. Tim, I'm going to throw it over to you, and can you give us a quick overview of what PACE is?
Sure. So show of hands, how many people know a fair amount about PACE? Okay. And how many would this be like your first exposure to PACE? Good, okay, great. Thanks both for being here. So PACE is an acronym for Property Assessed Clean Energy. And PACE legislation has been passed by, I believe it's 34 states across the country now. And it's a little different in every state. So we're going to be talking about Texas law, which is obviously where most of us will be working. Some of us probably work around the country, but for the most part, we're assuming that most of the projects will be in Texas. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So PACE works by a state legislature passing an ordinance or a law that allows for PACE financing to be used in the state. And then local municipalities, typically counties, in some cases, and in ours, the city of Houston, opts in to participate in the program. So the rules are kind of the same across the state, but it's kind of a patchwork quilt as to which counties or cities have opted in to participate in the program. There's no government money involved, but so why do counties or cities participate? PACE financing depends upon a tax lien or assessment on the property, and so that is put in place by the local taxing authority. Again, mostly counties, in our case, the city of Houston and the ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction, which is basically the unincorporated areas of Harris County around the city. Fort Bend County has also opted in, so all of Fort Bend, which is Sugar Land, Katy, and all the things in between, all of the city of Houston and the ETJ here, as well as many other counties around the state. So a property owner has had in the past the opportunity to pay cash for improvements or to get traditional financing. And we're all kind of familiar with those opportunities. PACE provides another option for a property owner. I've never met a property owner, even those sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars, that have enough capital. Capital is always an important part of a transaction. And so PACE financing was created to incentivize property owners to invest in energy efficiency improvements. So in Texas, those include things like lighting retrofits, new air conditioning, controls, new roofs, new curtain walls, solar panels, things that reduce energy or water consumption. PACE is limited to about 20%, it's a guideline, 20% of the value of a property. So the largest property closed in Texas to date is $23 million, a project up in Dallas. So that project was like $100 million. There's no legal maximum or minimum of the size of a PACE project, but from a practical standpoint, you're typically looking at a few $100,000 minimum. Typically, there have been, I think the smallest project's about $146,000 that was actually closed here, but for the most part, you'd be thinking about a PACE project that is several $100,000 or many millions of dollars. It's kind of like if I want to have a solar panel on my house and I call out and say my son's aquarium wants a solar panel that's like 3 inches square, it's going to be a very expensive solar panel because of the critical scale-up stuff. And so it's kind of the same way in PACE. It just makes sense to have projects that are of a certain size, although there's no legal maximum or minimum. So if I'm a property owner, I decide I want to utilize PACE. So I agree to basically allow a lender to get a security interest in my property, not in me as an individual, not in my company, but on the dirt. And so the loan is tied to the dirt. And it is repaid typically through a line item on the annual tax bill as another line item. So you've got property taxes, school taxes, airport taxes, hospital district, Port of Houston taxes, and your property assessed clean energy tax. And it could be done through a water bill, it could be done through your property tax bill. There's a variety of ways to give a tax bill to a property owner. And the idea behind PACE is very simple. I want to spend X dollars on improvements. They need to save more dollars in energy and water use than it costs to put in and finance. So if I spend $1 to buy a solar panel or a chiller or an LED light or whatever, I need to save over the life of the project, 15, 20, 25 years typically, need to save more energy dollars over the life of that project than it costs to buy, install, and finance. And so that's, I guess, the longer story than you asked for.
No, I think you captured it pretty well.
Great, thanks, Tim. And yeah, I think, the great thing about the PACE program here in Texas is that it's all private capital. It's up to the building owner to choose whichever capital provider they want to use, whichever contractor they want to use. So there really are no requirements on that side as far as restrictions, since it is a free market-based program. And as Tim indicated, this is a program that's growing across the state of Texas. It's in 17 different regions across the state, and as the last check, we were covering over 40% of the population. So the program's only been in place for a few years, and we're starting to grow and get some really nice projects under our belt thanks to owners and property managers like Seth. So on that note, Rachel, could you tell us a little bit about, for whom PACE makes the best sense as a financing tool, and what are the most common project types?
So whenever I think about who is kind of an ideal client or project for PACE, it really does span the spectrum, but a couple of things that have really stood out when looking at different projects is something that's going to be comprehensive and capital intensive is typically very attractive because obviously everyone's competing for internal capital, and so getting that approved and over another project option that's available for the ownership can be difficult. So if you're looking at something that due to the nature of what it is, it's going to have a longer payback period or ROI for the owner, that's going to be attractive for PACE as well, because PACE is going to be set, the loan terms are going to match the average useful life of the equipment that you're installing. So compared to traditional financing where you might be looking at a 5 to 7 year term, with PACE you could be looking up to 20, 25 years. If you're installing solar panels, they now have 20, 25 years to repay that loan, and so that improves their cash flow position so that they're not going negative and having to put down a large upfront deposit. So that's really attractive. In terms of excuse me, property types, really all of the property types that qualify are really great candidates, and I don't know if we've covered that, but it's pretty much any type of facility with the exception of no residential in Texas, and then it has to be privately owned, so no public institutions or publicly owned property would qualify. And so across the board, whenever I look at these, the sector that really has the most benefit from utilizing PACE due to the nature of the assessment mechanism is going to be someone who could potentially be looking at a split incentive type issue where, think of commercial real estate, where the tenants that reside within most of the buildings or a lot of the buildings pay for their own utilities. And so the building owner at that point is not incentivized to do any upgrades to the property because it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for them to recoup that cost. So that's just costs that they would be sinking in. And so a lot of times with triple net leases, they can pass through property taxes and as part of their CAM charges. And so that's a great way to let an owner think longer term about the property that they're upgrading and say, even if I don't know if I'm going to hold this for the next 5, 7, 10 years, I can still think longer term and say, maybe a CHP system is right for this property. It's going to increase efficiency. It's going to get us the cost savings that we need, but I'm not worried about not recouping my money because at the end of when they sell the property, it's going to automatically transfer to the next owner. So not only will the next owner take up the improvements that were made and the benefits that come from that, but they will also take on the repayment obligations. So it really does let you take a long-term view of the property and do improvements that are going to make it as energy efficient and cost effective as possible.
Great, thanks so much, Rachel. And I think those are a couple of really good points. One, that basically this functions similar to a sidewalk or a sewer assessment. It's not something that's new. It's just kind of reframing this type of financing.
Sorry, I just thought about one more as I'm kind of looking through the projects that we're working through right now. Another sector that is starting to utilize commercial PACE even more so and larger project sizes too is similar to the project that he was referencing up in Dallas is developers. So folks that are going in and are developing a piece of property, maybe it's a brownfield redevelopment or it's a rehab, say a downtown office building that's been closed, and they're going to rehab that into multifamily or to a hotel. And so the developers are coming in and they're trying to put together their capital stack as to how they're going to fund that. They're now seeing that PACE can be an integral part of that capital stack and come in and they can essentially carve out the measures that would qualify for PACE, whether it be building envelope or HVAC upgrades that they need to do to not only modernize the facility, but to get it up to code or whatever it might be at this point. And so they can carve that out and use PACE to fund that piece of it. And in doing that, that frees up some of their potentially owner's equity, or it reduces their need for mezzanine debt, which is going to be a lot more expensive. So they're lowering their overall weighted average cost of capital. And so we're seeing a lot of interest, not only in Texas, but across the country from developers that are starting to take notice and see this as a great way, so that some of those, but I guess previously you would think maybe that's a nice to have, maybe I don't need to put in the most energy efficient windows. Now they're finding that there's a cost effective way that they can do that, and so those pieces don't get kind of value engineered out of the project.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And I think that's so important, and really one of the key pieces of the PACE program is that it lowers the utility costs and increases the net operating income for a building owner. And especially, we know a lot of developers, you may only look to hold their property, 3, maybe 5 years, but PACE being transferable, automatically transferable to the next owner, really provides a mechanism for the owner and the developer to go ahead and put these upgrades in place, and then long-term allow the tenant as well as the community at large to reap the rewards. So on that, you had talked about, some of the rehab that can be done to buildings, with some of the extreme weather events that we've had here. Tim, how can PACE be used as a recovery or resiliency tool?
So there's several things. There's things that are outlined in the law of what you can and can't do. Then there's things kind of in a practical standpoint that do and don't make sense just from a business application standpoint. The law is very clear and specifically allows for on-site generation. So whether that's a solar panel or a CHP, cogen, trigen operation that generates things on the building side of the meter. You can't go out West Texas and buy up a county and cover it with solar panels just out on its own. It's got to be on the building side of the meter. So there's a kind of a well-known story in town that there's one of the plants kind of out in the southeast industrial side of town in the Ship Channel area that 8-9 years ago was hit by the hurricane, lost power, and you kind of go down the list of hospitals and nursing homes and the critical things and the industrial things kind of at the bottom of the list. Well, being without power for a month or two, you can imagine the dollars get racked up in terms of lost revenue. And so resiliency is so important, and I've lived in Houston my whole life. Actually, I was born in Dallas, but at the age of 8 months, I packed up my family and moved to Houston, so I've been here my whole life. And we no offense, John, I love Dallas too, but you have power outages a lot here, either because of a hurricane or just because of the trees. You use power lines, and so looking at resiliency and the ability to stay online is very important. Those kind of projects can qualify. Battery backups and those kind of related things are so important. So not only are we looking at projects that conserve energy, but that can provide energy in the event of an outage. And so I think that covers the question.
Great. Did you want to add? Yes.
So microgrid type situations, possibly working towards the future and trying to figure out microgrid situations here in the city is something that maybe could be worked into the profile of PACE?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, and I think, especially given where we are right now, PACE is a resiliency mechanism on the distributed generation, but then also disaster recovery tool to help on the existing building side, folks that, had their buildings damaged and may need a new roof or redo their insulation or redo, something on the building envelope. PACE is an opportunity to add, a different type of financing than previously may have been used into that capital stack, as you were talking about, Rachel, and really make it, much more of an economic play for the building owner. So on that note, to kind of continue this financing before we go and talk about the building that we have here itself, Rachel, can you talk a little bit more about how PACE differs from other types of financing? We talked a little bit about mezzanine financing and traditional financing, but if you wouldn't mind chatting a little bit more about, the value add that PACE can bring to this, as well as the PACE assessment itself, what can be included in that assessment.
Okay. So let me start with that piece so I don't forget that one. So what can be included in the PACE assessment? So outside of just your direct project cost, the cost of your chiller, the cost of your lighting, that can also include the cost of design and engineering, any type of inspection fees, permit fees. Really, you just take a comprehensive look at what it takes to go into putting together the PACE project. And typically those costs can all be rolled into the financing. And so again, it's 100% financing of all of the hard and soft costs associated with the project. And so that's one feature that makes it, to kind of segue into how is it different than other forms of financing, is that it is 100% financing. And so that's very difficult to get anywhere else. And so your traditional financing, again, is going to require most likely a 20% down payment, and it's also going to be limited in the term. And so those are some neat pieces that make it very different. Another piece that's really important to a lot of owners is the fact that because it is tied to the property, it is non-recourse to the owner. And so we are really looking at the property. Should anything go wrong, the property is our collateral in this case. And then it could also never accelerate, which is another important piece of this, is while you may take out a $3 million PACE loan to upgrade your building, that can never all come due at one time. And that's not the case with traditional means of financing, where upon sale or upon foreclosure or bankruptcy, whatever it might be, the total amount of the loan would come due at that point in time, and that cannot happen with PACE. So those are pretty important differences.
You're saying the program is attaching to the property, so as a result, are y'all requiring, as part of the process, requiring appraisals or surveys or title work on that property?
That's a really good question. And so we don't necessarily require it. So what we're going to look at initially is the assessed value of each of the property, and so that's where we're getting our 20% threshold from. Okay. And so,
what source are you just going through the Central Appraisal District to look at that value?
We will, yeah. So we'll look at the most updated value. If there are some instances where maybe it's a new parcel or it's been a consolidation, or there's a dispute with the value, or there's a lot of different scenarios, sure, I guess, that could happen. Yeah. Right, and so we would rely on an appraisal, one that's done within the last 12 months, and so we could look at that value to set our lending thresholds as well.
Okay, so then that leads me to my next question. So let's hypothetically say this situation, this project, marginally exceeds the 20%,
okay,
but we don't have a recent appraisal. And let's say we need to order an appraisal. Well, as you probably know, depending on the size of the project, if it's a $230 million or whatever you said,
sure,
I can imagine the appraisal only being $200. So whatever the cost of that appraisal is, that something also we could roll into the cost?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. And I think it depends. Maybe from lender to lender, we don't necessarily require an appraisal in all scenarios. There would be certain instances where we might request that.
Circumstances might require it.
Exactly. If it's a new development or a redevelopment, then we would need to see what the projected as is, or as complete value is, so we know what we're looking at there. But no, those are good questions.
In the case of a redevelopment, the value after the work is done, kind of a future look at what the value would be appropriate to look at, because the current value might be insignificant. So that's another part of that.
Is that the same case for the new developments as well?
Okay, PACE is not eligible for new developments. Now, if you're doing a redevelopment, and there's been kind of a recent relook at the definition of the law that has said, okay, we will look at, and I confirmed this a couple hours ago just so I could answer this question with complete confidence, is that you have an apartment complex that's class Z, tear it down, and on the same site build a nice new apartment complex, that would be considered for PACE. Now, there's lots of other things that need to be looked at, obviously. It has to qualify and whatnot, but so in that term, a development would, but looking at kind of the future value, which is a little more challenging for an appraiser and a lender to kind of agree on. And so one thing about PACE, and I don't think, is there anyone from Simon Properties here today? Simon's been a big adopter of PACE. did a deal in California and some others around the country. They've done several in Texas, and they have said, kind of on the record publicly at these kind of meetings, that one of the reasons they like PACE so much is that it's so transparent. You have lots of people at the table looking at a PACE project. You've got a property owner and a lender, maybe a consultant, maybe an engineer, and PACE requires, we'll get into this later, but an independent engineer that's not the building's engineer, not the lender's engineer, independent, that will look at it and kind of vet the assumptions and kind of go back and forth and have a discussion to say, yes, this project makes sense. And so when Simon, puts in a new roof or a new air conditioning system in a mall, then they pass those costs into the tenants because it's no longer P&I that you're passing to. Legally, that has been converted into a tax payment. And so in most leases in my 30-plus year career, that's something that is escalatable, passed through to the tenants. Depends on the lease, but typically it would be. So you want to make sure that those tenants are happy by us pushing that cost to them. And they say, hey, you increased my taxes $1. Yes, but we decreased your electric bill, portion of that $1.25. And so you come out net to the positive. And so the benefit of having this is having the appraiser and having a conversation, unlike some real estate deals, it's kind of done in closed, smoke-filled rooms. PACE is very transparent and open, which I think, if in my career, I would think that the quality of PACE projects is typically, on average, higher than a lot of other real estate projects that happen just because you've got so many different professionals participating in the process, and they're really highly vetted, very transparent. So I think that's an important thing to note.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and a couple of things I wanted to just finish on that is that it's not for greenfield development, but definitely brownfield or redevelopment, as was outlined here. PACE can definitely be used for, as well as it can be used for any type of property except for single-family residential, multifamily of fewer than 5 units, or government buildings. So other than that, there's a lot of freedom and flexibility in which to choose the program.
And I'll just add, sorry, really quick, that I know some of you guys may operate outside of Texas, and this is very focused on Texas, but there are some states that do allow PACE for new construction. So if you have questions on that, feel free to ask us afterward, but just wanted to clarify there, but Texas is not one of them.
I was just going to add, that includes nonprofits, so churches. In fact, the first project in Texas that Keith Reel was the ITPR engineer in the back was a synagogue in Austin. They've been trying to get capital for a few years to do a air conditioning, replacement, and we're struggling trying to get the capital, and PACE came along as a perfect, so you had on one end this synagogue that was struggling for very limited access to capital. PACE was a perfect solution. Simon, I think, is the world's largest owner of retail properties and probably can borrow whatever they want, wherever they want, at whatever terms they want, have all kinds of access to capital. PACE was a great solution for them, and so looking at it, you kind of think, wow, it works kind of from one end of the spectrum to the other. Somebody that really doesn't have many other alternatives for capital, and somebody that has all kinds of access to capital. And so it really, I've said several times that PACE is the single biggest improvement in the commercial real estate business I've seen in my 30-plus year career. It's a big, big deal that can really change everybody in the room's business. It's really a powerful tool.
And so going back on the nonprofit sector, how would the structure work on them paying that back? How would you explain that to us?
It's a voluntary assessment, and so yeah, the good question that, churches don't pay taxes, right? Don't take property taxes. Well, you can pay an assessment, and there are, I believe, thousands of churches in Harris County that are actually in MUDs and municipal utility district, and so they pay a tax, an assessment for water and sewer because that's the way they get those services. Same thing, that they can voluntarily say, we're going to pay this back through a self-imposed assessment that we obviously will be obligated to pay back. It's not just some government tax that's being, applied to the masses. So does that answer the question?
Yes, obviously I'd like to go through deeper, but yeah.
You mentioned brownfields. Is that, I heard that word drop, but is there any special consideration for that, or is that just a redevelopment similar to all the others in brownfield?
I would say you hit the nail on the head. It's that there's something that was there existing. It's not a clean slate. That something new is going up on. So I guess that way we see that we could maybe talk a little bit more to this, but at least there you have a previous building that you could potentially be improving upon the energy profile by kind of looking back at that.
Yeah, exactly. And with those, it's a little bit on a case-by-case basis, but definitely can, have a conversation and chat through the details on that. But I wanted to circle back to something that you had said, Tim, about, or Rachel, about the program here in Texas being a little bit different than the programs, in other parts of the country. And I think that's a key thing for us to know is that, there's programs in California, there's programs in Connecticut, there's programs in Colorado and Michigan and all over the country. And they function a lot of times really differently than the program here in Texas does. There were over 130 stakeholders that came together from Environmental Defense Fund to business lobby groups to ensure that this was a program that was going to be a free market program that would allow the building owners and the developers to really have access to private capital and use contractors of their choice and just have a program that would work in a free market realm without a whole lot of government interference. And so I think that's just one thing I wanted to notate. Okay, so that it's time for us to switch from the financing side to talk about the building. And I'll get a picture up of it in a minute. So Seth, could you tell us a little bit, why PACE? Why did you guys decide that PACE was the financing mechanism for you, and how did you get buy-in from the property owner to go down this path?
Well, first of all, I'm not much of a speaker like the rest of the panel here. I think first we heard about PACE was from John Myers, president of Peloton Commercial Real Estate, and they're a Dallas-based company. It was in 2015, and PACE wasn't even in Houston back then. The building is a 1984 building. The chillers were getting old. It was hard to maintain. It was hard to find parts for it, or just being able to fix it. Every time something goes down, you have a nightmare of tenants being upset, they can't work. It was a challenge. The ownership of this building were not local, so it was kind of difficult to get them to send money back. It was.
That's not unique. Owners are always trying to
Yes, I mean, it's an investment and they want something come back and have to put more money in, yes. So in 2016, when I heard that PACE is officially running in Houston, I went on Google, found Mr. Tim. We had I think over an hour-long conversation. It was in November 2016, I believe. And it's been a challenge, because, anything you do for the very first time, you have to reinvent the wheel. And I had to prove to my owners, it was my obligation that I'm not just wasting time. This is something that is not just too good to be true. So we went through every single option, from lending, contractor, projects, from LED lights to cooled roofing, window film, every single thing. We pretty much reinvented the wheel. That's why it took almost an hour to learn everything there is about it. And I had so much information that they couldn't say no. Literally, we had like thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. There you go.
Thank you. So Tim and Rachel, can you kind of talk through what your roles were in this specific project and how you supported Seth and the team in going down this PACE route?
Sure. Do you want to start since you started?
Sure. So as Seth said, we had the opportunity to visit and kind of what we're doing today, kind of talk about what is PACE, how it works, benefits to it, and why it might apply. Our company, PACE Houston, is a private company, not to be confused with the city or the Texas PACE Authority, which is the nonprofit administrator so far of every PACE district in the state of Texas. If you go to some other states, you have individual lenders that get to be the administrator of an area. If you want to do a PACE deal in that neighborhood, that's kind of who you've got to use. Texas, free market, capitalism, it's a great state for all kinds of reasons. And I think while we like to be first out sometimes, I think it was very wise for the state of Texas to kind of look around the country and see a few other states. They're doing this, I like this, I don't like that. They're doing that, I like this part, not that. And kind of pick and choose the best part. And the Keeping Pace in Texas and Texas Space Authority came up with what's called Pace in a Box. It's meant for counties to be able to very easily implement it and roll it out that keeps the free market option open, so that a property owner has the ability of what kind of consultant they use, which lender they use, which contractor, which equipment they use, and have all options available. And so my background's 30 plus years in commercial real estate. I've built, managed, leased, renovated, financed commercial real estate, mostly here in Houston, a little bit around the country. My partner's background is banking and finance and strategy, and Keith is Reals, an engineer, is on our team now as well. And so we provide consulting to property owners of just kind of the options that are out there, and we kind of come in as the owner's advocate. I've sat in that chair more than I've sat in this chair, and just said, okay, here's pros and cons and how it works and what we can help. And every deal's a little different. And so that's kind of how we position ourselves. And the joke is that, you know, we don't make a lot of money on anything. The goal is that we've built our company to kind of make it on volume, and we're well on the way. We've got one deal closed, and we're working on several others. But we are kind of the owner's advocate to kind of be in and help the property owner kind of navigate the process. And, you know, it's not rocket science, but last I checked, you know, most asset managers, property owners have a full-time job already. And this is not something that you do over and over and over again, unless you're maybe Simon Properties or something. And so there is, I think, value, just the time and expertise that we can get a property up that learning curve a lot faster. Most of the times, these projects, especially in Texas, especially in Houston, are generated by, oh shucks, my chiller is failing. Well, let me spend the next 9 months kind of looking at no, you know, I need to do something quickly, right? I mean, it's time sensitive and stuff, and so we can, I think, provide some assistance in getting all the options on the table and getting through that process maybe a little quicker. And it was great working with Rachel and her team on the lending, very, very professional, and they've done, you know, tons of deals just here in Texas as well as elsewhere around the state. And so I'll let her talk about more the lending side.
Sure. And so we were solely the financier on this project. There are different models for different lenders, and we are only involved in the lending side of this. And so a little bit about Petros is we are a specialty finance firm based out of Austin. And so we are kind of a lean and mean machine, and we have transacted across the country from California to Michigan to Texas, to our most recent transaction that brought us into Florida as well. And so to date, we have transacted, I guess, 9 of the projects here in Texas, including obviously the 1225 project. And so we're just glad to be on board. And to your point, you know, so many times we get this is too good to be true feedback whenever we talk to folks. And so it's actually really nice to get a chance to sit across the room from people or across the table and talk through the questions and, you know, well, what about this? And, well, certainly this can't happen, and get them comfortable with the way that it works and let them know that, yes, you know, there are processes that we have to take you through, but at the end of the day, it's a fantastic tool that can really facilitate a lot of energy efficiency projects and a lot of cost savings across your portfolio. And so as a lender, really our role is to help you through the back end process of this. So, you know, we come in at different times in the process. Sometimes we work directly with the building owner, and so they will come to us and say, I already have this project identified, I just need funding for it. And so at that point, we will then, you know, walk them through the rest of the process. Or maybe we are working with a consultant or a contractor, and they have a project that they've identified, and they're proposing to a client, and they need someone to sit down across the table from the client and help them explain how this is going to look if it's funded by PACE. And so we'll come in at that point too. And so really our job is to make sure that we are underwriting to the standards of the PACE program that the administrators have set, that are responsible for the lending community because we all want the growth of commercial PACE to continue to take off. So we want to make sure that we are being financially responsible in the types of partners that we're working with and the projects that we're underwriting. And so we'll kind of walk through that process if there is a mortgage lender that's involved with the project, because PACE does take a senior lien position on the property. If there's a mortgage in place, we need to get consent from the lender. And so while that may seem like an onerous process, it can certainly slow it down and add a little bit of time to it. It is necessary, and we want to make sure that the mortgage lenders are aware of what's going on at the property and that they consent to it, they understand how it's going to work. And so at the same time too, we know what the mortgage lenders are looking to in terms of debt service coverage ratios and what they want to make sure is in place for their asset that they have. And so we're also making sure that we're meeting that. And so a lot of times we're the paper pushers. So, we try to take a lot of that off of, the contractors that we're working with. If you guys are bringing us, a project for, I don't know, a chiller that you're replacing, we want you to be able to, connect us to the ownership, get that conversation started, and know that, you guys aren't going to be responsible for knowing 100% of what PACE is and what's necessary to get it all the way to funding. That's really where we come in and push all the papers, get the contract signed, and make sure all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted with the PACE authority as well. So.
Do you find that the banks have a certain equity requirement? Do they want to see a certain percentage of equity in the facility for them to be comfortable with it? Or are there thresholds like that they look to?
I mean, it depends, and again, that's why we have our thresholds that we have set as well. So we're going to be looking at the property value, and so we also take into consideration the amount of mortgage that they have there. And so for us, we'll lend 20% if there's a mortgage, 20% of the property appraised or assessed value if there's a mortgage in place. But if there's not a mortgage, we could potentially go up to 30%. And so we're kind of staying, at that. It's a pretty safe limit that we're looking at there.
Yeah, it sounds like, why would he owns a building, it's worth $100 million, and you've got a $50 million mortgage on his building. And I call you and say, hey, we want to put a $5 million PACE assessment ahead of your $50 million. It's click. It's like, I would never agree to that. Well, we have on our website, PACEHouston.com, a list of 116 banks that have heard that story and go, oh, it is in my best interest as the first mortgage holder to let Rachel put a $5 million lien ahead of you. Well, why? Well, PACE isn't allowed to be on the building unless it creates more value than it costs. So we've put in $5 million worth of improvements in the building and a $5 million loan, but it has reduced the operating costs of the building by more than that. So your borrower now is in a better cash flow position to pay your loan back. That's one. Second, the chiller that she financed and put in is attached to the building that you've got a lien on. That's two. Three, and we talked about this a little bit a minute ago when Rachel said it can't be accelerated, even in default. Think about it. If you don't pay your property taxes and your home is in a tax foreclosure sale, what's due? What's past due is all that's due. They don't go out and get next year's taxes and next year's taxes out 20 years in the future. Same thing with PACE. So if you've got say you've got a $1 million loan on the building over 20 years, it's $50,000 a year. And so the first mortgage lender can get current if the property owner defaults by just paying probably a $50,000. If they went 2 years, maybe it's $100,000 and you've got $1 million of improvements in the building. And so when a mortgage holder hears that, they kind of go, I actually am in a better situation because my borrower's in a better cash flow position. I've got an improved asset, not a depreciating asset. And if things really get upside down, which I've not seen happen yet, but it certainly could, to get right, you only have to bring it current. You don't have to pay it off. So those are three reasons why mortgage holders agree. I've heard of a couple of cases, and it was more that they already had an issue with the property owner and they're just looking to not do business. But in virtually every case, you can get there where you get the mortgage holder to agree to that. One thing to note, maybe a hair on the tail, but if the mortgage is in a CMBS portfolio, a commercial mortgage-backed security where All of us in this room, you know, we get a mortgage on our house, and tomorrow, with or without our knowledge or consent, the mortgage is then sold to Wall Street in a bundle of thousands of mortgages, like a stock. And there's a person that's kind of charged with managing that. That person's hired for one reason, just to say no to anything, any reason. There have been to my knowledge, only 2 CMBS mortgage PACE deals done in the country. It's possible, but if there's a commercial mortgage-backed security on the property, it would be difficult to do a PACE deal. We could certainly look at it, but that's kind of an exception. Legally, you can do it. It's just maybe more trouble than it's worth to do. But the mortgage deal's not a big deal. It can sound like a big deal. Like, why would a mortgage holder agree to have somebody come in after them and be ahead of them in the capital stack? Well, it's really to their advantage for those 3 reasons. So hope that makes sense.
And I'll agree with you. It does make it more difficult, but it's 3 now.
It's just growing and growing, Tim.
It is. So it's never say never. It's, you know, let's have, I would say, have a conversation, but just know that you can be fighting an uphill battle if that's in place.
Let me ask this too. So, you know, the ultimate goal with this clean energy, right? This was put in place to be able to facilitate the target area that we need to focus on the most is buildings and clean energy. So, you know, especially here in Houston, air conditioning, you know, we've got a target. You know, air conditioning is one of the big, you know, the big targets we can target here. But how does this translate over the long haul? Say we can start translating these PACE programs into successful models. How's the transition? How does that transition translate into residential, into translating, you know, into the future? I know that this is our focus and this is our target right now, but does this have a kind of vehicle to translate into transitioning to residential clean energy options for people in the future?
Yeah, no, definitely. There are a lot of houses within the city of Houston and Harris County, so I totally understand your question and where you're coming from on this. And definitely, there's a market for clean energy and distributed generation that is, as of yet, untapped, or tapped as much as it could be. As of right now, though, as far as PACE goes, the focus truly is on building up the commercial program and ensuring that basically all of the kinks are worked out. Again, as you know, Tim said earlier, you know, we've got programs that are all over the U.S. and basically, when the program was built in Texas, we cherry-picked the best of the best that we saw in all of these other programs, and then appropriately Texanized it so that it would work for the market here. And my thought is that is what's going to happen in residential, and I don't think it's going to occur over the course of the next couple of years. But I think, you know, several years out, it's definitely something that we could be looking at.
Same token, on the municipal side, you know, is translating these opportunities with the commercial side. How can we, you know, implement this on the municipal side?
I was just going to expand on the residential comment. And again, we're focused on Texas here, but there are residential programs in place in California, Florida, and then Missouri, I believe, is the 3rd that has residential programs. And so those are alive and well. Billions of dollars have flown through those project fundings. So I think that we will see those grow in time. But again, whenever you start dealing with less sophisticated homeowners, where maybe they're contractors that could come in and take advantage of someone that doesn't know what's going on, there's always going to be the case where something bad happens, and when it happens to a consumer, then that hits the presses, and that gets the attention of the lawmakers a little bit more. And so there's a lot of work that's going on right now to add in some consumer protection measures, and so that's changing that. And I think that once that takes place, you will probably start to see more residential programs pick up. Absolutely. And so that's why, yeah, and that's the difference that's one of the things that commercial PACE has gotten right, with requiring the lender consent, requiring the independent third-party review, for most states require that. That's really helping, and I think that they're taking notice and saying, okay, that's something that we need to be looking at on the residential side as well. I mean, huge market, huge market.
That's a good thing. In Florida, yeah, in Florida, you don't have to, unless they've changed it recently, you don't have to go get the consent of the first mortgage holder. So you got the first mortgage on his building, and you read in the paper that he put a lien ahead of you, and you, Seth, what are you doing? Texas, you know, there's nothing to hide. It's transparent. Let's get everybody at the table. This is in your best interest. So let's all talk about it and be on the same page, and which was, I think, really wise to do that. Your question was about municipalities, like getting more areas that adopt into PACE?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. I think, you know, you can only imagine, you know, a county judge and county commissioners or a mayor and city council, and I think the focus is primarily on counties because I've lived here my whole life. You know, anybody know how many cities are in Harris County?
A lot.
I thought 12, 15, 30. So there are 29 areas in Houston or Harris County area that you can't do it in Bel Air or Piney Point or whatever. And so it creates a little bit of an issue because there's those little exceptions, right? So if you go to a county commissioner or whatever, they get phone calls and emails and letters from people all the time. You know, my neighbor's dog's still barking. I told you about last month and you haven't stopped it, you know, or whatever. Some are legitimate. And so there's a lot of noise. And so if one person says, hey, our county ought to adopt PACE, it probably won't go anywhere. If you get employers and contractors and viable projects, we want to expand our plant or renovate our building, and there's a bunch of contractors that are voters and taxpayers and employers that make that call, that letter to a county or county commissioners or county judge, they're going to listen. Quick example, Houston took a while because it was really, really early in the process. PACE was still really new. Fort Bend happened much, much faster. Brazos County happened almost overnight. Coincidentally, the county tax assessor collector in Brazos County was personal friends with the county tax assessor in Fort Bend, picked up the phone and said, hey, we're looking at this PACE thing. The guy in Fort Bend literally said, do it. Really? Do it? Just do it. In Brazos County, it was kind of a credibility transfer. Brandon says it's a good deal. I know Brandon, he says it's a good deal. I'm in. And so as it begins to expand, you have county commissioners or mayors or city council members that have done it in their place. They call their friends in other parts and go, this is the greatest thing. It doesn't cost the city or the county anything. It's private money. I get property owners that are improving the quality of their assets so we don't end up like Detroit with this decaying infrastructure of buildings that don't have air conditioning and lights. We lower our utility demands so that we don't have to, you know, incentivize somebody to go build a new power plant in town. It extends the life of, you know, our water and electricity resources. It improves the tax base. Ultimately, there's just good reason after good reason after good reason to do this. And when the city was looking at adopting this, it was really interesting, you know, widely known. Ellen Cohen, who championed this ordinance for the city of Houston, kind of under her authorship and guideship to get it in, is probably the most liberal person on city council. Jack Christie, probably the most conservative person on city council, were holding hands singing Kumbaya on this. They both loved it for very different reasons because it is that good. And most people, myself included, the first time I heard about it, I kind of folded my arms across my chest and I said, I think I missed something. This sounds like it's too good to be true. And most people have to hear it 2 or 3 times and ask questions, but it is really a great deal. Last thing, and I'll pass this and shut up, but Gerald Hines spoke at Rice a while back and was kind of asked about this and says, you know, is this about being green? And he kind of smiled and said, well, it is green, but that's not really what it's about. Oh, it's about, you know, reducing the amount of electricity used. Well, it does, but that's not really what it's about. What's about improving cash flow, you lower the operating costs in a building, improves cash flow. He goes, it's getting close, but that's not what it's about. It's really about improving the value of the asset because a value of an asset is the capitalized income on a building. So you can either raise rents $1 or you can lower operating costs $1, flows through to have a improved cash flow. And the value of commercial real estate, investment real estate, multi-tenant office buildings, apartment complexes, is the capitalized income. And so PACE makes, I use the term, it makes sustainability sustainable. You're not just lighting money on fire to be green. It makes good sense for the environment because we are using less power, less water, extending the life of the asset, while we're also making it good for business. Bottom line, you have improved cash flow. Economics 101, that's a good thing. And so that really makes these projects that previously there hadn't been an incentive for a property owner to do, to now want to do. And so PACE, by law, you could do a single measure ECM, energy conservation measure, a new chiller, window film, an LED lighting retrofit, solar panels. You could do one standalone improvement. Most PACE projects that are being done are actually comprehensive, and Rachel said this a minute ago. They're comprehensive where there are multiple energy conservation measures all being done at the same time. So you might sell solar power and you might sell chillers. Well, you know, and I've been there. You've got the sale. You're this close to finalizing the sale, and it's just solar panels. Well, do your client a favor and say, you know, before we sign this, let me introduce you to my friend across the aisle who sells chillers, and vice versa. You got your chiller sale just about done. You know, get the other people involved, because I was with the Esperson buildings for about 10 years downtown, and the owners literally could have written a check to buy any building in town, hundreds of millions of dollars of cash. They weren't about to give me $1 million for a new chiller. So I went to a big bank in town, $1 million, had to put $300,000 or $400,000 down and borrowed, I think it was $700,000. I think it was for 4 years. That chiller didn't pay for itself for about 14 years. It was an awful financial deal, but why did we do it? You got to have air conditioning in a building in Houston, and our chillers needed to be replaced. And so you had to do that. Well, if you've got a chiller that has a long-term payback, say 14 years in that example, and you've got LED lights or window film or controls or something else that's a lower CapEx expense, lower capital expense, that has a higher ROI or a faster payback, by putting those two together, Rachel said earlier, the loan term is up to the maximum, the useful life of the improvements. Chillers are 20, 25, 30-year chillers. If you know they're water cooled or a mag chiller, you've got a long life. That gets you that long term that you want. And LED lights or window film or controls or some of the less expensive, better payback energy conservation measures added to that bring the payback down, and so you get that positive savings to investment ratio, SIR, S-I-R, savings to investment ratio, which has to be positive. So you can't spend more money than it saves. So to get the chiller paid for, use the lights. The problem in not only Houston but nationwide, you have property owners running around doing the low-hanging fruit, where I'm just going to do the lights, I'm just going to do the window film, I'm just going to do controls, and then now I've got my cooling tower that's got to be replaced, my chiller that's got to be replaced, my roof that has to be replaced, which are all long-term, big-ticket items, and it makes it harder and harder and harder to make that sale to ownership until it stopped working, and then you're really in a fix. So Seth and his team was really smart by looking at all of these things together, and wisely they didn't do all of them. They did the ones that made sense: the chiller, lights, controls. And those three, in his case, was the perfect formula that made that work. And those deals are going to be different, but I think there's a real good incentive for you to meet people here in the room tonight. You're selling chillers and they sell window film, or they do backup generation or whatnot. By bringing those folks together, and you kind of end up being each other's salesperson, so that you've got clients and leads and relationships, and so do they. And so by working together, we can really make a bigger improvement.
And so, come back onto that, I was like, so something does go down, a chiller goes down or something like that, or you have a project coming up, what's the time frame or just an estimated ballpark figure of like planting the seed and then getting approval? How big, I mean, is it vary greatly by project, like how long did this take from when you guys first spoke to when, it was said and done?
That's another really good question, and I wish I had a solid number for you to say that the average is X. But it's really all over the place. We've closed transactions in as fast as 3 weeks from getting all of the information, and that is an outlier. That is not norm or to be expected. But exactly, and so
from getting all of the information.
Right.
So the client has to provide all of the information, and that's a lot of information.
And so what we tend to find is it can be easily a 2 to 3 month process, and we will move. I know contractors, you guys will move as fast as you can. The building owners will try to collect the information as fast as they can, and we'll try to underwrite as fast as we can. But what we have found is that, sometimes it takes a little bit to figure out, especially when you are pulling in a lot of different measures and you're trying to figure out how they all play together. It's just, once identifying what the project is going to be, a lot of times that is what takes a good chunk of time. And then collecting information. We need to have financial reports. We need to have, your organizational documents, and some of that's readily available, and we get that really quickly. And so, we can move through. We can move as fast as, the clients are ready to move. So I would say, just as a rule of thumb, give yourself, a good 60 to 90 days, especially, at least if you're at that point where the owner or the project is going to take place. They've identified what they want to do. You guys are going to move through. Give yourself at least 60 days from that point.
Tim, you mentioned the value of the improvement of the asset increases. Does that mean the appraisal of this district next year reappraises it to reflect the improvement and then increase property taxes?
Gee, that's the first time I've heard that question. That's a great question, and it's on everybody's mind. I improve my asset, am I going to get hit with an increased tax? Tax assessor collector has specifically said we are not intentionally going to single out PACE projects and go sick them. Now, all buildings, thinking of Harris County, the HCAB has all buildings, houses, office buildings in a rotation. And, yours was appraised 2 years ago, so you're up, 2 years from now or whatever. I think it's a 3-year rotation where they try to go through and do it. And so they have said that they're not going to intentionally go single out PACE projects that have done that. In Houston or in Texas, property owners don't have the obligation to report sale prices and other things because it's more of a property owner driven market than the government driven market in some states. And so the answer is I would assume that ultimately if you improve your building, whether you use PACE financing, traditional financing, or your own equity, sooner or later the value is going to go up and it's going to be assessed up, but there's not a specific connection to the appraisal district to do that. So there's not that connection, but just arguably, you improve your building at some point in the near future, you probably will get higher values.
I'll make a plug for solar panels, and I'm pretty sure Texas has a law that exempts solar improvements from raising the property.
That's right. On residential, for sure. I'm not 100% on commercial applications.
When I read the law, it looked like it was general across all properties, but that certainly
is it for sure?
On a commercial office building, for example, of course you have to protest the taxes anyway, but if this helps your building gets fully occupied, obviously the value of the building is going to go up. But if you still have a low occupancy, you can protest it and you probably would win because you can calculate the value of the building based on how much rent you're getting from the building over the time. So depends, if it helps you make it 100% occupied, yes.
And I was just going to go back to one of the questions that was asked earlier about expanding the program to different areas. And so if you said this and I missed it, I apologize. But if you're looking at a project in a place in Texas where there is not currently a PACE program in place, don't let that necessarily deter you. So a lot of times having a project teed up and ready to go and an owner and a contractor and a financier that are ready to move that project forward is the fastest way to get it approved in a new area. So, if you have that, know that it might take a little bit longer. Add some extra time there on the timeline if we know we're going to have to go through, a county or a city board to get that approved. But don't let that deter you and start having conversations. Maybe reach out to the PACE authority at that point and let them know that there's something going on and they can be your best advocate to get that moved forward.
What channels would we need to utilize if we wanted to implement that in our county? Because I have a presence in Victoria and in Houston.
Call me. Yeah, I work with local governments to get the program adopted. We use the PACE in the Box model, which was referenced earlier. So the way, as we talked about earlier, the program structure in Texas so that it's identical, whether you're in the city of Houston or El Paso or up in Dallas, and the documents are all the same as well. So whether you have a project here or again somewhere else in the state, you're going to go through the same process. The building owner is going to go through the same process. So if an owner of Simon has closed multiple projects across the state, and what they like about the program in Texas is that they know what to expect because the documentation is the same every single time.
So do you have a listing on your website or anything like that about which municipalities are participating?
Yes, we do, and in the back there are 2 handouts. One is a case study on Seth's building, and then the other one is an overview of the program, and on the back it lists the different jurisdictions that we're in.
Thanks.
And definitely, one of the other reasons why we see the local governments adopting PACE is that it really is an economic development tool. As Seth said, you make the improvements to your building, you're going to more than likely increase your occupancy. And really with that, local governments want to ensure that they're attracting and retaining businesses. And this is one way for them to be able to do so.
So rather than getting a construction loan, why would a client use PACE what is the financial benefit? What are the percentage rates?
So it's all going to be based on treasuries, and it's going to vary from project to project. But I would say right now a 20 years, probably your typical term. You'd be looking at somewhere from 6.5 to low 7s maybe. Treasury rates have moved up a little bit here in the last month or so. And so really the advantage is you can't, I would say the one thing you can't do is look at this as solely just an interest rate comparison, because shorter term construction or equipment loans are going to have lower interest rates. But you have to remember too that those are going to be your recourse loans that can accelerate. They're going to be capped at a certain point in time. So again, if you're paying for a chiller that has a 20-year life over 5 years, that's going to look really bad, and that's probably never going to get approved by your internal parties to move forward. So, there's a lot of reasons, and so PACE isn't going to be a fit for every single project. I will be the first person to admit that. We've looked at some projects and I've just said, this is not, you have other alternatives that are better for you. But there are a lot of cases where it really works, and it provides you some mechanisms to get recovery for expenses that you put into improving your property.
Seth's example, I mean, his owner didn't need money, they just wanted money. They aren't strapped for cash. They could have very easily paid for this and all the buildings along the freeway and bought them all. And so it was my story at Esperson. I mean, the owners had the cash, but they don't want 6 or 7% on their return. They want 20 or 30% on their money. And having a loan that is fixed for 15, 20, 25 years that can't be accelerated is very attractive. And the fact that it legally, technically gets converted to an assessment payment instead of P&I. I don't, anybody members of BOMA in the room, but there are, in a multi-tenant office building, there are guidelines of what you can pass through to a tenant and what you cannot. And interest you can't typically pass through to tenants. There are pages and pages and pages of rules and exceptions. But when it is a assessment, it's a tax, and in most leases that is something that is legitimately a tenant's expense, especially if you can prove that, which PACE does, that it has been more than offset by a reduction in utility cost. And so it's 100% financing, so the owner doesn't have to use their capital. It's shareable, passed on to the tenants, long-term fixed rate, non-recourse. And we've all heard the story, oh, I can borrow from my bank at less than that. Oh, will your bank give you 100% financing? No. Will they fix the rate? No. Will they do a 20-year term? No. Will it be recourse? Yes. And so PACE, instead of comparing to a mortgage, a first mortgage, compare it to equity or mezzanine, which it is always going to be a more attractive financing option. But some people just say, look, I'd rather pay cash. I got cash sitting in the mattress. I'm just going to put the cash in the building. It's fine. So it's not for everybody, but when you look at it compared to the alternative of equity or mezzanine financing, which is really what it's replacing, because it's at the top of the capital stack, your first mortgage is there, it typically looks very favorable.
There's also a lot of additional soft costs if you go that route.
Right. So on top of all the bidding and researching the market on the equipment, we also did a very thorough bidding process on the loan. I mean, we went with Petros because they were the best option, but there are so many other lenders available in Texas too. So you can literally, it is a free market. You can research the different lenders. We got a very customized loan. We have different options to pay it off at different years. There's so many opportunities. When you get into it, it is fascinating. There's so many different ways to do things.
I just had a comment about since banks don't, so if you're looking at project financing from a bank, they're not going to provide 100%. So then you have to look at really what your cost of equity is. In other words, what your weighted average cost of capital. I don't know kind of like finance terms, but typically that's going to exceed the 6.5 to 7%. So if you can get 100% financing through PACE and it saves you 10% a year, it only costs you 7%, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So that's really the key, is that you're not using internally generated capital, which has that equity component, that cost of equity.
Yeah. And The other thing is that most of us have sat in the conference room once a year when it's time for next year's budget, right? And I got $1 million available for CapEx improvements in my building. And the engineer wants to buy some kind of piece of equipment, always. Need more equipment, controls, chiller, whatever. The marketing person always wants more marble in the lobby, right? Well, we're not going to buy half a chiller, and we're not going to do half a lobby. Got $1 million, and so you work it out, and you know, one wins and one loses. With PACE, you can use your own internal capital for CapEx improvements to do the things that don't qualify for PACE that are cosmetic. New carpet in the lobby upstairs, or new marble in the lobby, or more plants, or whatever. And utilize PACE for the things that reduce energy and water conservation. And so it allows a property to look at your CapEx budget, not just next year. You know, most buildings are like the Gulf Freeway, kind of constantly under construction. We're going to do the cooling tower this year, the chiller next year, the controls the next year, the lighting the next year, because we've only got X dollars to spend. Well, if you can pencil each of those as contributing more savings than they cost to put in over their life, which they all will do in most cases, why not realize all of those benefits today and go out into 1, 2, 3, 4 years in the future on those CapEx budgets and bring those items that are saving energy and reducing operating costs and realize the benefit of that today. And back to Mr. Hines' comment, because that improves the value of the building, and that's why we're all in business. We want to improve the value of our asset. Buy low, sell high. Buy it, renovate it. And if there are things that you can do today that will save more energy dollars than they cost to put in, by definition, that has improved your asset value, and so there's no reason not to do it.
Great, thanks, Tim. So Seth, a question for you. What were some of the key aha moments as you were going through this? I know you've worked in commercial property for a while. You're very familiar with traditional financing. What was it about this that just really motivated you to do the improvements that you did using this mechanism?
Well, aha moments. We had a lot of challenges, of course, at the beginning. It's, as I said, doing it for the first time. I have to get the best value for the owners. That's my responsibility. So I have to go research the market. Yes, it's going to pay for itself, but it doesn't mean you have to go and get the most expensive tools out there, I think we kind of got lucky because we were able to deal with contractors who were competent. They were flexible. They could work with us. I would say, out of all of us, I'm the luckiest. I got the best value because they spent so much time. They did so much work. Everybody was involved. Extra light on the LED lights, train. Everybody just came down with the best deal possible. So that was amazing at the end when we put the numbers and we saw the savings of beating the cost and the finance over 20 years and everything by almost $1 million. That was amazing.
Can I ask a second question? What was the most difficult part of selling it to upper management, the whole project?
Well, to be honest, Tim, Rachel, all nice people. I didn't know them. My owners don't know them. They don't know what PACE is. Is it real? How good it is? It was a matter of proving it to them. I'm proving it to myself first. I had to prove it to myself first that this is going to work. That's why, Texas Space Authority, I would call Charlene, in Austin. I would call John Myers in Dallas. I just bugged the hell out of a whole bunch of people, Just got as much information as I could. There's the PACE Nation. I did everything I could. And as I said, I went step by step. I proved every single part that what is going to happen. And they would say, so what if this? What if this? So every part of it was a challenge in a way. Especially there's a language barrier. You have to translate everything, go through this, go through that. So that's why it took a long time. But the numbers, everything, it is too good, And they were happy they didn't have to spend money at the end of it.
And definitely. That's one thing that we hear over and over and over again is that it just sounds too good to be true. But in the end, we have owners like you that say, oh, well, this is how I can pay for it. So I think that's good. Yes, we've got a question.
So what's the difference? Is PACE kind of like an ESCO, an energy savings company, or ESCO still around? What are the pro and cons going like directly to ESCOs if those are still available?
Yeah, ESCOs are still around. It's a little bit of a different model. Typically, we're seeing the performance contract model more on the government and school districts, where this seems to function a little bit better for the commercial owner. It's got a little bit more flexibility to it. And with that savings to investment ratio greater than 1, there typically is not a performance guarantee. However, if the owner so chooses to add that, that is something that the owner can can add as part of the PACE project. Yes, ma'am.
Seth, how long did it take you to convince the owners to get it done? And like, what is the top 3 things that they liked after you finished with it? Getting everything wrapped up.
Well, there were 3 stages to convincing them. First was just the concept, to move forward. And I remember where, like, I would call Tim 7 p.m. It's like, okay, Tim, we need an article about this. There's a meeting in Milan, and I have to send it over, in 30 minutes. And he was driving, and he would pull up and get on his phone and, send me an article. Then was the scope of work. To them, there was this suspicion that, is it really true? Do we really need window film for the building? The lights are working, right? Why should we replace the lights? Then the third stage, and in a way the most difficult part, was the financing. A lien on the property. You keep telling them, you're showing them the documents that, yes, it is against the property, but it has these benefits. It stays with the property. There are taxes. It's just, there was an element of trust, of accepting this, that yes, it is true. I'm not just making these up. There were links and links and links, documents and documents and official documents. And it finally worked out. I wasted a lot of their time.
Didn't waste it.
No.
Used it. Did that answer your question?
And what was their takeaway? So how long has it been since you finished the project?
I haven't finished the project.
Since you started the project, I'm sorry.
Well,
since you convinced them to move forward.
They haven't seen the results yet. We're installing the LED lights as we speak. Our train chillers and pumps are sitting in the yard waiting for a crane. So conversions, controls, they're still working on them. They're still installing. We haven't seen it yet. So, and they're probably going to come back in summer or winter to take a look at it.
Great, thank you.
I'll let you know then.
Well, we'll follow up in a year from now with a look back so we can see the fruits of this labor. Definitely. We're going to close out the session in just a few minutes. Were there any final questions from you guys? Yes.
One last one I was curious to know, is there any kind of marketing or advertising campaign that y'all offer?
Yeah, so Texas PACE Authority, each organization does definitely promote PACE in their own way, but Texas PACE Authority, as the private nonprofit arm of the local government that administers the program, yes, we do workshops like this all over the state. We also have a service provider training workshop that we do on a regular basis. The next one in the Houston area will be in April. And then on the website, texaspaceauthority.org, we have a ton of different case studies, tools, resources, white papers, et cetera, that you are welcome to use. And I think, okay, I can't make this work. Yeah, and right, give it a minute and it'll come on. And then in the back of the room, as I mentioned, there's 2 flyers and handouts, and they have the URL for the Texas PACE Authority that will send you to the different areas that you need in order for some of that marketing information. Yes, sir.
Is it possible to have a site tour of this project to see firsthand what is going on and assess the progress?
I'll leave that to the building owner.
Yeah, I'll give you my business card. I'll send you an email whenever it's ready. You can come and tour it. Is that your question?
Yes, I just want to, out of curiosity, to come down and see what exactly is
being done.
Sure.
And, you know, because seeing is believing just to get.
Of course. I wish there was something I could go see.
Still in process.
When will the construction complete then for your project?
By May 1st, it should be all done.
One more question. Do we have any projects in Fort Bend County yet? We were really excited last year that PACE got adopted, but Fort Bend, do we have any projects on the ground yet?
We're working on a couple.
Great.
So stay tuned for more details. How's that? Definitely. Any other questions? Okay, well.
You did ask real quick. You
Yes.
mentioned at the very end that you can add performance guarantees to the project. And I was thinking about benchmarking and saying, okay, if we're going to show some improvement, how do we show improvement, or do we need to prove it? I'm curious how often that's wrapped into the project, benchmarking and
So we do ask that the buildings enter their energy and water usage into Energy Star Portfolio Manager so that we can be tracking that. There's a partnership with the Houston Advanced Research Center and the State Energy Conservation Office who are working with Texas PACE Authority. Trying to pull that slide up, but I guess that's not going to happen. Who are working with Texas PACE Authority to, at an aggregate level, track that information to be able to then prove out long-term across the state in each region the benefits of PACE. As far as a building-by-building level, definitely that's something that can be put in place if you're looking for a performance contracting type measure, or a deemed energy savings at the end. All right, anyone else? Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for taking time out of your evening. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. You all were fantastic, and I think everybody learned a lot. And this is such a great group of folks to work with. And thank you, Steve Stelzer and USGBC, for providing us the space for this venue.